They called her weak during the battle test, then realized the instructors were down. Candidate Voss. The name hit the air like a door slamming shut, and every cadet in the pre-assessment hall turned at once. Commander Rockthal stood at the front of the room with a data tablet in 2 of his 8 hands, reading pre-scores aloud to the assembled cohort. His voice was flat and deliberate, the voice of someone who had done this many times and saw no reason to soften it for anyone. Strength Index 42, Reflex Matrix 44, Cognitive Combat Score 41. He lowered the tablet by a fraction. Average in all recorded categories, statistically unremarkable. Mara Voss picked up her gear pack and walked to her assigned row without responding. The hall was large and cold, lit with the clinical white overhead lights the Coalition preferred for assessment days. Around her sat cadets from more than a dozen species. Some were broad enough to fill 2 seats. Some had 4 arms resting casually across their equipment. One cadet near the far wall was running 3 simultaneous mental focus routines, his bioluminescent skin pulsing in low, rhythmic patterns as he prepared himself for the day. By every physical and cognitive benchmark the Coalition used, Mara was the least impressive candidate in the room. Single species human, average height, no natural enhancement, no extra limbs, no species-specific capability that translated to anything the assessment measured. Rockthal had already moved on to the next name. That was the first mistake he made. The Grand Assessment had been running on Vethara 9 for over 200 years. It was the single event that separated cadets who advanced from those who were reassigned to support roles so far behind the front lines that their careers effectively ended before they began. The Academy had been designed to find the best soldiers in the known galaxy, and the assessment had been built to do exactly that, efficiently and without sentiment. The problem was that the Academy had always defined best using the same framework, the same measurements, the same expectations built around the same species, reflecting the same understanding of what strength was supposed to look like. Humans had been admitted to the Academy only 14 months ago. The decision had been more political than merit-based, and several senior instructors had made their feelings about this quite clear. Rockthal had been the least subtle of all of them. Vethara 9 hung in the dark above a nameless gas giant, enormous and cold and deliberately uncomfortable. The Coalition believed that discomfort produced better soldiers. Every corridor on the station carried the faint smell of recycled air and industrial coolant. Every schedule was demanding, and the few spare hours cadets were given were short enough to feel like a reminder rather than a break. Mara had spent her first 2 weeks on the station memorizing it, not because anyone asked her to. She had looked at the station map on her first day, recognized that it was large and complex, and decided quietly that knowing it might eventually matter. So on her off hours, while other cadets rested or socialized or ran optional drills, she walked. She found the maintenance corridors and the non-standard shortcuts between rings that the official cadet maps did not include. She located the emergency blast door panels, the power relay stations, the medical bays tucked into secondary sections, and the equipment lockers in the service passages that most cadets had never found because they had never gone looking. None of it appeared on any grade. None of it was required by any syllabus. She learned it anyway. Rockthal gathered the cadets in the central briefing chamber 20 minutes before the arena doors opened. He stood at the front of the room with the steady, unhurried authority of someone who had not been seriously questioned in a very long time. "You will operate in fire teams of 4, he said. "The assessment runs in 5 phases across shifting terrain environments. You will be evaluated on speed, precision, tactical judgment, and team coordination. Some phases will punish hesitation. Others will punish aggression. The arena does not reward one kind of soldier. It rewards the correct response to the correct situation." He let the chamber sit quiet for a moment. "Some of you are ready for today. Some of you are not. By the end of this assessment, you will know which. His gaze moved across the room at a slow, deliberate pace, and when it reached Mara, it did not stop. She was already looking at the arena door. The team assignments were posted outside the chamber. Mara found her name without searching. She had been placed with Owen Blake, a quiet human male who was technically gifted and deeply uncomfortable in direct confrontations. Clara Denning, a human female who was fast and observant but who briefly locked up when sudden sharp sound hit without warning. And Vale, a Grenthi cadet with 4 powerful arms, excellent combat capability, and a clear and well-documented record of refusing to take direction from anyone he did not consider his equal. It was, by any fair reading of the records, the weakest combination on the entire board. Mara looked at the list for a few seconds and went to find her team. Owen was at the gear room when she arrived, running checks on his equipment for the 3rd time. He was lean and precise and carrying a tension in his shoulders that never fully released. He looked up when Mara arrived, then back down at his pack. "We have Vale," he said. "I saw. His team integration scores have never cleared a 6. "I know." He watched her face for something he was not finding. "You are not worried." "Worry does not change the list," she said, and began checking her own gear. Clara arrived shortly after, already suited, scanning the arena approach map on her wrist display with a focus that was doing a lot of work to hide what was underneath it. Mara noticed and said nothing about it. Vale came last, moving with the wide and unhurried stride of a Grenth who had nothing to prove and no interest in pretending otherwise. He took one long look at Mara with 4 flat gray eyes, arrived at whatever private conclusion he arrived at, and turned to face the arena entrance without acknowledging her further. Across the prep area, a Dravian cadet named Sin stood with his own team but was not paying them attention. His compound eyes were on Mara. He had been quietly logging observations on her for 3 weeks, trying to identify something he could not yet name. That morning's entry read, "She does not adjust her behavior under observation. No performance, no social display. Consistent regardless of audience. Significance, still unclear." The arena doors opened with a deep, grinding mechanical groan. Mara walked in first. Owen exhaled behind her. Clara straightened her shoulders. Vale followed without a word. The doors sealed, and the grand assessment of Vethara 9 began. The gravity cut out 32 seconds after the doors closed. There was a sharp click somewhere beneath the arena floor, and the pull of the station's artificial gravity simply vanished. The floor stopped being the floor. Up and down became matters of perspective. The entire space equalized in every direction at once, and the only way to navigate was to manage your momentum carefully against the walls, platforms, and structural beams that now served as reference points in a space that no longer had a ground. From the observation deck above the arena, Rockthal watched the cadets respond. Several teams adapted quickly. Several did not. 3 cadets from separate teams immediately overshot their first push off a surface and tumbled into the far walls faster than intended. One of them was a Grenthi, which was notable because Grenthi were rarely caught off guard by anything physical. Mara was already moving. She had practiced zero-gravity navigation 6 times during the station's off hours, in a training pod listed as available during the overnight maintenance window. No one had assigned this practice. No one had suggested it. She had read the assessment description carefully 3 days earlier, noticed that Phase 1 was described only as an environmental adaptation challenge without further detail, made a mental list of what that phrase could mean, and prepared for the most likely options. Zero gravity had been at the top of the list. She crossed the first sector in 43 seconds, using short and controlled pushes, reading the terrain ahead before committing to each direction change. Vale struggled in the first 30 seconds, his powerful frame working against him in a space where there was no surface to brace against. He recovered and caught up, but Mara had already cleared the first checkpoint. Owen moved with precision that compensated for his lack of size. Clara was careful and unhurried and made no errors. They cleared Phase 1 with the fourth fastest time in the cohort. Phase 2 came without a pause. The arena reconfigured around them, walls sliding into new positions, and the team found themselves sealed in an atmospheric hazard chamber. The air changed almost immediately. It became dense and faintly yellow, a simulated disorientation compound used to measure how cadets performed when their own senses stopped being reliable. Clara's hands began to tremble within 40 seconds. She kept moving, but her steps became uncertain, and twice she reached for a surface that was not quite where her eyes told her it was. Owen's decision speed slowed noticeably. Vale held up slightly better due to his species' chemistry, but not by much. Mara felt the compound pull at her depth perception, softening distances, tilting the room without actually moving it. The edges of surfaces blurred enough to make precise judgment unreliable. She stopped using her eyes as her primary reference. She had memorized this sector's layout from the pre-phase briefing maps. She moved by that memory now, counting steps, placing her hands against surfaces to confirm position, giving directions to the team in short and direct phrases. Owen 2 steps right, door frame at shoulder height. Clara, follow his voice. Vale, stay at the rear and tell me if anyone stops. Vale looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he moved to the rear without comment. He did not agree with her. He had not changed his opinion of her. He simply recognized that she was providing the most useful information in the space, and his survival instincts were stronger than his reluctance to admit it. They cleared the chamber with 11 seconds to spare. On the observation deck above, Rockthall's colleague, a Sarathi instructor named Kale, turned slightly in his seat but said nothing. He made a note. Phase 3 was the hostage extraction scenario. Urban ruin terrain, timed and demanding, 2 opposing units, a tight objective that required both speed and precision. It was the phase that eliminated more cadets than any other in the assessment's history. Mara's team entered the ruined sector at a controlled pace. Owen had already identified 2 approach routes from the pre-phase briefing map. Clara had flagged a timing gap in the patrol pattern of the secondary opposing unit that gave them a 4-second window. Vale had moved to the rear of the formation again without being asked, which Mara recognized as the quietest possible form of cooperation. They were 58 seconds into Phase 3 when the arena lights turned red. Not the soft amber red of a scenario complication flag, a flat and steady emergency red that pulsed once and then held, absolute and unmoving. The simulation system spoke in its neutral tone. Assessment paused, system review in progress. Then it said nothing else. Every cadet in the arena stopped moving. The silence that followed was total. Then the comm channels activated with a sharp burst of static and fell into complete silence on every frequency. Not interference, not a degraded signal, a clean and deliberate cut across the entire primary network. Owen turned to Mara, his expression caught somewhere between controlled and alarmed. That is not a simulation error. No, she said, it is not. Clara was cycling through alternate frequencies on her wrist unit. Nothing came back, not from the observation deck, not from the academy control room, not from the station's emergency broadcast channel, which was always running and was now entirely silent. Vale moved to the nearest blast door and tested it. Sealed. He tested the second. Also sealed. The third door at the far end of the sector was half open and cycling, its seal relay flickering between locked and open in an uneven rhythm that meant its control feed was gone. Sin, who had moved toward Mara's position without fully realizing it, kept his voice low. The observation deck is not responding. I know, she said. The cadets from 3 separate fire teams had begun drifting toward the center of the arena, pulled together by the sudden absence of direction. They looked at each other, then at the red lights, then at nothing in particular. Some were talking. Some were cycling through dead calm channels. The ones with the most physical confidence looked the most uncertain. They had been trained to be fast, to be strong, to execute within a clear command structure. They had not been trained for this specific and disorienting experience of having no instruction arriving from anywhere. Mara looked at the flickering door at the far end of the sector. She looked at her wrist unit's cached station map. She looked at the door's position relative to the maintenance corridor. She had walked 11 weeks ago, alone, on an afternoon when she had nothing else scheduled. "We move," she said. Owen looked at her. "On what authority?" "On the authority of the situation," she said. "You can stay here and wait for an instruction that is not coming, or you can come with me." She did not look back. After 4 seconds, footsteps followed, more than just her team. The flickering door gave way on the third attempt. Mara hit the manual release lever behind the panel casing, the one that appeared on the maintenance schematic she had found in the Public Engineering Archive, but on no standard blueprint. The door shuddered, ground sideways, and opened wide enough for a person to pass through. She went first. 8 cadets followed, not just her fire team. Sin moved up close behind her, quick and low. 2 cadets from other teams came through without asking and without being invited. They had simply looked at the rest of the arena, looked at the group moving with direction, and chosen direction over standing still. Vale came through last and positioned himself at the rear again, without instruction. The corridor beyond the door was a maintenance passage, narrow and poorly lit, smelling of coolant and settled dust. Yellow guide strips ran along the floor. Overhead, conduit bundles ran in dense and tangled lines. It was not designed for cadets or soldiers. It was designed for maintenance workers, and most people on the station had never seen it. Mara moved without hesitation. "Where are you going?" asked a cadet named Finn Adler, tall and direct, the kind of person who found it difficult to follow anyone he had not been told to follow. "We do not even know what has happened above us." "That is exactly why we are going," Mara said without slowing. Finn opened his mouth again. Sin spoke before he could. "She has already identified the breach vector," Sin said. "Let her work." Finn looked at him. Sin returned the look steadily. Finn went quiet. Mara had been running the problem since the moment the lights turned red. The comm cut was too precise to be a system failure. Failures cascaded and left partial signals and shifting interference patterns. What she had heard on those channels was a clean, deliberate severance. The blast door seals had triggered on an automated threat protocol that had 3 activation conditions: hull breach, fire event, or internal security event. There was no fire alarm. Hull pressure on her wrist unit read normal. That left one option. The timing was the other detail. The comm blackout had started during the assessment's scheduled communications dark window, the 1-hour period when external transmissions were reduced to prevent signal interference with the arena systems. Anyone planning an operation around this station would have known about that window. Anyone who knew about it had access to the Academy's assessment schedule. This had been planned around a specific hour. Someone had chosen this window deliberately. She said none of this aloud. She filed it in the part of her mind that was tracking the problem and kept moving. The maintenance corridor connected to an auxiliary lift shaft 300 meters along the passage. The lift itself was offline, but the access ladder alongside it was not sealed. Mara opened the shaft panel with the manual release key, the same key that appeared in the maintenance archive, the same archive she had spent an afternoon reading. She started climbing. Sin was right behind her. The others followed without argument. "You knew this ladder was here," Owen said from below, slightly breathless from the climb. "I walked this section in my 2nd week," she said. "Why would you do that?" "Because I had an afternoon with nothing scheduled," she said, "and I wanted to know the station." Owen was quiet for a moment. Then, "That is a very human reason to do something." "Probably," she said and kept climbing. 2 rings up, the shaft opened into a secondary service deck. Mara pulled herself through the hatch, checked both directions of the corridor before stepping into it, and waited for the others to come up. The service deck was empty, but from above them, through 2 sealed fire doors and a section of bulkhead, came a sound that she recognized immediately. Controlled movement, measured footfall patterns, organized and deliberate, not random. Someone was running a sweep. Sin moved up beside her. 2-point pattern with a rear cover unit, he said quietly. Asheville Collective Standard Entry Protocol. The Asheville Collective. She knew the name. An anti-coalition faction that specialized in high-value abductions and targeted disruption of coalition operations. They preferred locations where security was temporarily reduced, and they preferred captives who mattered. An orbital academy, during an annual assessment, during the scheduled Comdark window, with every senior military instructor in one concentrated location. They came for the instructors, Clara said. Yes, Mara said. She turned to face the group. And the instructors are still here. That is the problem we are solving. She looked at each face in turn. Some were uncertain, some were steady. Finn was measuring her again, and this time he gave a short nod. We have no weapons, Vale said. We have arena equipment and we have this station, Mara said. I know where things are in it. She looked at Owen. There is an emergency equipment locker at the end of this service deck. Find out exactly what is inside it and come back fast. Owen moved before she finished the sentence. She looked at Sin. Log everything. Every movement, every timing detail, every observation. If this goes wrong, that log is how anyone finds out what happened here. He straightened slightly, understood. Owen returned in under 90 seconds. 2 signal disruptors, 1 partial charge, an emergency breaching tool, 4 pressure seal patches, a first aid kit, 3 emergency lights. Mara looked at the list. She thought about the corridor layout above them. She thought about the sweep pattern. She thought about the smoke systems in the lower arena sectors, still cycling on their autonomous program because no one had issued a manual shutdown command. It is enough, she said. And she meant it. They moved in silence through the service deck and into the secondary corridor network that ran alongside the station's main spine. The passages were narrow and dim, lit only by floor guide strips and the occasional wall panel that had stayed powered through whatever the collective had done to the primary grid. Owen stayed close to Mara's left side, working through the signal disruptor specs in his head. Clara watched every junction before they passed it. Sin covered the rear, his compound eyes tracking a range of motion that no single-eyed species could match. At a service junction 2 sections in, Mara stopped the group and moved alone to a ventilation access panel on the corridor wall. The panel opened on the same maintenance key. Beyond the grating was an internal duct running parallel to the corridor directly above. She listened. 2 sets of footsteps, measured pace, pausing every 20 meters for a position check, exactly what Sin had described. She counted the intervals, calculated the reversal timing, and returned to the group. 2-person unit in the upper corridor, currently moving away from us. They reverse in approximately 4 minutes. We take the east maintenance shaft, not the one we came up. It comes out behind their return path. Finn looked at her. How do you know about that shaft? I walked this station, she said simply. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he stepped back and let her lead. The east shaft was tight and built for equipment transport rather than people. The handholds were spaced for a standard maintenance unit, which meant the larger cadets had to angle their bodies through each section. Vale managed it by sheer stubbornness, adjusting each movement without complaint. At the top, Mara stopped. A cadet named Eli Ward, one of the 2 who had attached themselves to the group back in the arena, had caught his leg on a torn conduit bracket on the way up. The wound was not severe, but it was bleeding steadily, and the corridor ahead had enough lighting to make him a visible and slowing problem. "You need to be carried," Mara said. Eli shook his head. "I can move." "Not quickly and not quietly enough for this section," she said. "If they hear us here, we lose the approach." Eli started to object again. Vale stepped forward and settled the cadet across his broad shoulders with the efficiency of someone for whom this was not a significant physical event. Eli stopped talking. The other cadets said nothing for a moment, then they moved. Between the group and the observation deck's lower access point was a collective checkpoint. 2 guards positioned at a corridor junction with a complete sightline in both directions. There was no alternate route that did not add significant time and take them through sections Mara had not mapped. She thought it through for 40 seconds. Then she set down her equipment pack, removed her cadet identification tag from the front of her suit, and handed the tag to Owen. Clara stared at her. "What are you doing?" "Walking up to them," Mara said. "That is not a plan." "It is the beginning of one," she said. "When they focus on me, the left junction is open. You will have 4 seconds. That is enough." She looked at Sin. He had already moved toward the left junction without being told. His compound eyes could manage 6 simultaneous tracking points. He would know exactly when to move. She looked at Vale, Clara, and Finn. Each gave a short nod. Then she straightened her suit, smoothed her hair, and walked around the corner looking confused and slightly frightened. The 2 guards saw her immediately. They shouted for her to stop, which she did, raising both hands with an expression that was not entirely an act. They came toward her, demanding identification, asking where she came from and what she was doing in a restricted section. She answered every question slowly, stumbling over words, looking around in the way people look when they are genuinely disoriented. She gave them nothing useful and made them work for every answer, which kept their attention fully and completely on her. She did not need to do it for long. 4 seconds was enough. Sin recorded in his log later that it was the most deliberate use of apparent weakness he had ever witnessed in a tactical situation. He noted that humans seemed to have a particular and unusual ability to be underestimated, and that in the right hands this functioned as precisely as any purpose-built tool. The lower access point to the observation deck was not sealed. The collective's entry team had left it partially open for a fast exit. Mara found the instructors in the secondary holding room behind the deck, 6 of them, sealed inside and unconscious from a stun compound dispersed through the ventilation. She found the ventilation override on the wall panel and switched the room to fresh air cycle. Rockthal was the first to stir. He pushed himself upright, looked toward the door, and found a human cadet standing in the open doorway with a jury-assembled signal disruptor in one hand and 12 cadets positioned in the corridor at her back. He stared at her for a long moment. He did not speak. "There are additional collective units in the upper section," Mara said. "The main group is in the command annex 2 sections from here. We have the lower access cleared." She met his eyes. "We can discuss everything else after." Rockthal stood. He was unsteady for a moment, then stable. He took in the cadets in the corridor, the equipment they were carrying, the positions they had already taken without being told. The instructor's reflex rose in him clearly. The instinct to take command, to reassert the hierarchy, to put everything back in the order it was supposed to be in. The cadets looked at Rockthal. Then they looked at Mara. The moment held in the air between them. Rockthal closed his mouth. Mara outlined the final approach in 30 seconds. 1 group to the east corridor to cut the collective's exit route. Vale and Finn to the direct approach at the annex entrance. Owen to run the signal disruptors and collapse the collective's internal communications. Clara on the door seals to stop reinforcement from the upper level. It worked exactly as she described. The collective's operation on Vethara 9 ended 40 minutes after it began. The Coalition Rapid Response Team arrived in under an hour, coming in hard and prepared for an active situation. They found a quiet corridor outside the command annex, sealed and secure, with 6 recovering instructors and 13 cadets waiting beside the sealed doors. Mara was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, working through a ration bar she had found in the emergency locker. She looked up when the response team came through, confirmed they were Coalition, and went back to eating. The senior officer in the team, a veteran commander named Hal Greer, looked at the line of secured collective operatives against the far wall. Then he looked at the instructors. Then he looked at the cadets. "Which one of you is in command here?" he asked. No one answered immediately. Then every head in the cadet group turned, in a small and completely involuntary movement, toward Mara. She swallowed the last of the ration bar. "No one officially," she said. "We handled the situation in front of us." Commander Greer looked at her for a moment. "Cadet." "Voss," she said. "Mara Voss." He made a note. The formal debrief took place 3 hours later in the main review chamber. It was thorough and methodical, conducted by a coalition review board that included 2 senior admirals, a military oversight officer, and Rockthal, who sat at the side of the room rather than at the front, in a chair that carried slightly less authority than the one he usually occupied. The board worked through the reconstruction of events from the beginning. Helmet footage. Sin's real-time log, which turned out to be the most precise record anyone had produced. The testimony of each cadet and instructor in sequence. Every decisive action during the breach traced back to a single source. The identification of the comm cut as deliberate. The maintenance corridor route. The lift shaft. The disorientation technique in the atmospheric chamber. The checkpoint approach. The ventilation override. The final approach sequence in the command annex. The board reached the same name each time and asked the same question each time. Who made this call? The answer was the same every time. When Mara sat in the testimony chair, she answered every question in the same tone she used for everything. Measured, unhurried, direct. The board members found, after several minutes, that they could not determine whether she was nervous. She did not appear to be performing composure. She simply seemed to already be in the state they were trying to evaluate. The senior admiral on the board, a decorated Vethani officer named Osrin, set her pre-assessment file down on the table after a long moment of reading it. "Your pre-assessment scores were average," he said. "Yes," Mara said. "Across all categories?" "Yes." He looked at her over the file, then explained today to me. Mara was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone gathering their nerve, the quiet of someone deciding how to explain something that seemed, to her, fairly straightforward. "Average is what I show you when there are rules, a time limit, and someone watching," she said. "Today did not have any of those things, so today showed you something different." Admiral Osrin was still for several seconds. "The station knowledge," he said. "The maintenance corridors, the shaft locations, the equipment locker positions. None of that is in any cadet curriculum." "No," she said. "Why did you learn it?" "Because I was curious," she said, "and because I thought it might matter one day." The chamber was quiet for a long moment. Rockthal, in the chair at the side of the room, had not moved since the debrief began. He had given his factual account of his recovery and had not spoken again since. He had not attempted to reframe the sequence of events. He had not redirected the board's attention or offered any commentary on the cadets or on Mara. He sat with his secondary arms folded and his expression composed, and he listened to every word. He had seen the cadets look at Mara before they looked at him. He had seen the moment clearly, the way it sat in the corridor between them, and he had understood what it meant. He was not a person who deceived himself easily. For perhaps the first time in a long and respected career, he had nothing to say. The board concluded the debrief with formal commendations for all 13 cadets involved and a security review of the assessment communication protocols. The collective operatives were transferred to a coalition detention facility before the end of the station day. The grand assessment was rescheduled, creating significant difficulty for the Academy's administrative team. No one on the review board mentioned whether the cadets had passed or failed Phase 3. It no longer seemed like the relevant question. That evening, Sin found Mara at the long observation window on the station's third ring, the one that looked directly down over the gas giant below. The planet was vast and slow from this angle, banded in deep orange and pale gold, its ring system catching the distant light of the sun and scattering it in long and diffuse arcs across the dark. Sin stood beside her and was quiet for a moment. He had been working on the final entry in his event log for the past hour and had not been able to finish it to his satisfaction. "I have been trying to write an accurate summary of today," he said. "For your log?" "Yes," he paused. "I keep writing entries and removing them because they do not capture it precisely." Mara looked out at the planet. "What part is difficult to capture?" she asked. "The part where you were afraid," he said. "I could see it clearly. Your hands, your breathing, the way you moved through the service deck. You were afraid for the entire duration, and yet you never stopped. I have been trained to believe that fear reduces performance. What you did today does not fit that model in any way I can easily explain." Mara was quiet for a moment. "Fear and stopping are two different things," she said. "Most people treat them like they are the same thing. They are not." Sin turned to look at her directly. "Was that taught to you?" She shook her head slightly. "No, humans just figure it out somewhere along the way, usually the hard way." Sin returned to looking out the window. After a while he said, "I will put that in the log." "Do what you want with it," she said. He made the entry. It was the last one in the file. It read, "She did not stop being afraid. She simply refused to allow fear to make her decisions for her. This is not a skill I was ever trained in. I do not believe it can be taught in any formal sense. It appears to be something the humans carry with them quietly, as naturally as they carry anything else. I have observed it before in small ways without understanding what I was seeing. I understand it now." Mara stayed at the window long after he had gone. Below her, the gas giant turned in its slow and ancient rhythm, vast and indifferent and magnificent, the same as it had been before any of them arrived, and the same as it would be long after every one of them was gone. She finished the second ration bar she had found in her jacket pocket and pushed off the wall. Then she walked back through the corridor toward the academy rings and went to get some sleep. They had called her statistically unremarkable. They had been accurate about every number on that assessment sheet. They had simply never considered the possibility that the numbers were measuring the wrong thing entirely. They would not make that mistake again.